Hello and welcome to Red's Business and Technology Podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Barnes.
And I'm your co-host, Nigel Heyn.
Today we're sitting down with Craig Ford, who's the Chief Technology Officer at Baidam Solutions, author and Board of Director of AISA, which I'm sure you'll get into shortly. Craig, thanks for coming in. Looking forward to getting insights around cybersecurity and everything you've got going on and your journey. Mate, do you want to start with your background in terms of what you did before, what you're doing now?
Sure, no problem. It's certainly a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to the chat today. So background, I guess, probably start from the beginning. I guess I started out in probably early 2000s, 2001, 2002 in sort of a, your general IT support kind of role. I started a traineeship in a little country town in Inverell, if anyone knows where that is.
Don't actually, no.
Most people don't, which is why I say that. But yeah, generally it sort of started out, sort of worked with a traineeship, worked my way up until I was the senior tech there, and sort of got to a point where I kind of couldn't do anything more from there, couldn't learn anymore. So I decided to move to the big smoke. So chose Brisbane, and pretty much haven't looked back since. Sort of kept going along in that sort of IT role generally for probably, I would say, about 10, 12 years until I sort of decided I thought I wanted to be an IT manager or a CIO, and I decided I'd do a bit of a master's degree in IT management to sort of give myself a bit of formal qualification because I only had the sort of the industry qualifications. So went along and started, and I so deliberately just sort of went, oh, really interesting, incident response, cybersecurity units. And I'm like, okay, I'll give that a go. Just more for it sounded really cool to do, more than I thought it would actually add major value to being a CIO or IT manager. And I kind of got a bit of a taste and didn't look back since. That was the direction I went from there, and couldn't stop pushing towards the cybersecurity direction. And I started out, I guess you would say, doing a bit of a dual role where I would sort of do anything I could in cybersecurity along my normal IT role until I got that first jump over. But yeah, I had a bit of a natural ability in the ethical hacking, pen testing space. So I kind of, that was my first path in cybersecurity, and
okay,
it's quite fun.
Awesome. Did I see in your background you did a brief stint in Rockhampton as well?
Yes, I did. I did a 6-month blip. I would call it. It was sort of, went up there and sort of had a bit of family up there, and the wife and I were like, after we got married, we were just like, oh, let's try somewhere new.
Yep.
Done 6 months in Rockhampton. It was too hot for me.
Yeah, I grew up in Rocky. I spent 25 years there. And I did see you at Kerr Solutions with Bruce Kerr and that kind of thing. It's so funny how that happens.
Small world.
And then pivot into the InfoSec cybersecurity space. What intrigued you about that? Why did you do that in terms of on the side when you could have just stayed in IT? I'm sure there's heaps of IT jobs and you could have been down the path of being IT manager, CIO. Why cybersecurity?
I think it was the continuous learning. Like, it was a real challenge, like really trying to dig in and pull things apart, particularly that ethical hacking pen testing space. I love to pull things apart and figure out how they work. So I had that natural mindset. And as soon as I started doing it, I just wanted more, just kept going and going and going. But yeah, it was that natural curiosity, I think, what it was.
An inquisitive mind.
Yes, yes. And I find, like, as I'm looking for young pen testers sort of coming through in that sort of space, if you can find the ones that really sit there and you can see them watching and being curious and trying to figure out how things work, they are the best hackers you'll ever have, best pen testers you'll ever get. So, yeah.
Cool. And then, so part of that journey, then, which we'll talk about later today, you've released or co-authored 5 books now.
Yes.
What was the rationale around doing that? Like, what made you go, all right, I want to put down on paper my thoughts around like cybersecurity? Like, why did you do that?
It's kind of funny, actually. If you'd had asked me like 7 years ago, probably just before I started doing any of my writing, I would have laughed if you'd said I'd write a book ever.
Yeah.
That was never an aspiration or even a consideration. It was not even a thing I thought I would enjoy doing. So it's a bit of a strange path that I didn't think I would take. I'm pretty sure it was 2018. It was the last ACSC cyber conference in Canberra. I actually went, and I was working for an MSP at the time, still sort of doing that dual IT sort of time, sort of doing a bit of those both roles. And I was sitting there and they were like, no one was talking about the risk that MSPs have with holding all the passwords, having access to all the systems. And I'm like, no one's talking about it. Why is no one talking about it? So after the conference, I sort of went away and I was talking to my boss and I'm like, no one's talking about it. Someone's got to talk about it. And I randomly saw on a CSO online, the cybersecurity magazine online said, if you have something you'd like to share or want to talk about, send through a pitch or an article, and if we like it, we'll publish it. So I done my first article around MSPs and some of how they held all the keys to the kingdom and how that was what sort of major risk it was. And yeah, that was 200 articles later.
Wow.
I've probably even more than 200 articles now with, I think I write for about 5 magazines now. So
Yeah, awesome.
it's, that's what started the journey.
It's really interesting because that's something we talk about sometimes on the show. Is I think it's a big misconception these days that, especially in the small business space, they trust their MSP or managed service provider or outsourced IT company with everything, and they sign an MSP agreement and they think that they've got cybersecurity covered as well completely. You don't need to go to a separate company. But you're right, there has been a fair amount of breaches of actual managed service providers in Australia in the past 6 months, which is not great, right? And it's hard as a small business owner because you can't invest in cyber businesses and SIEMs and SOCs and all that other stuff, as well as an IT team internally or an MSP paying a monthly fee or whatever. So you just try and trust them, hope they've got it for you. So, but I think that is a myth that does need to get busted. So you're ahead of your time, I think, in that in 2018, going down that journey. So that was the first book. What was that called?
That was the first article. So
Okay,
I started the journey just sort of doing the freelance sort of cyber journalist, just doing it because I love to do it. Just kept doing it after a while. But I sort of got I think it was probably about 40 or 50 articles in. And I had a colleague, Mandy Turner. I don't know if you know Mandy Turner, but basically she just said to me, I really like these, they're story-like, they're a bit more fun, a bit more entertaining, a little bit more open for everyone to sort of understand and learn a little bit more. And she goes, this would be really cool in a book. And I'm like, okay, maybe I'll see if I can put a book together. And that's where A Hacker I Am, my first book, was born.
Yeah, awesome. And what was the success of the book? So is that what the book was about that MSP being a threat, the first book, or was there other stuff as well?
There was quite a lot in it. It was a little bit different because when I was doing the first master's degree, I noticed that, cyber books and IT books, they're pretty dry and horrible to read, right? And I hated that. And as I was putting it together, I've got pretty much 50 for A Hacker I Am and A Hacker I Am Volume 2. There's basically 50 topics in each of them on anything from hacking autonomous cars to, the mesh grids that they'll use to connect to each other to, Wi-Fi printer hacking and pretty much all of the entry-level kind of conversations and information you would sort of get, just sort of that high level and enough to go, ooh, I want to know more about that and go have a bit more of a dig yourself. So yeah, basically 50 topics each book.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. And they were sort of, the first 2 were self-published and I went down, which we can talk about in a minute, I went down a more traditional published route with my next set of series. But yeah, so first 2 were self-published, but yeah, done quite well. And surprisingly, I sell more of them in UK and US than I do in Australia for those 2 books.
Really?
Which is an interesting fact, but
Aussies don't care about cybersecurity.
No, apparently not.
Hence the reason why we do this podcast, to try and educate people, right? We want them to care. Yeah.
Definitely the case. So your first 2 books self-published, and then we went through. Why did you go through someone else for the other books, and what were the other books about?
So I kind of did a bit of a switch because I was doing a lot of like the articles that I mentioned before.
Yeah.
So I was doing writing for Women in Security magazine. I've sort of done a regular column since they created the magazine and sort of wanted to try and encourage more young women into cybersecurity. So I'm like, what could I do, as a guy, right, in the industry? What can I do to sort of help encourage them? I'm like, why not create a cool female hacker character? It's an actual fantasy novel, so a cyberpunk novel series, Foresight.
Right.
Lead female character Sam goes on her journey, sort of coming in the hacking world, getting right into her mindset. So it's first person.
Yeah.
Gives along her journey, and yeah, sort of that's where their Foresight series was created. And it's actually I went the traditional publishing route for kind of one main reason is I'm not perfect, and I know self-publishing is they're not perfect in some of that. Not grammatical wise, there was a few mistakes, which is in self-publish you can only read your same stuff 50 times and there's always at least one thing you've missed. So,
give it to your neighbour who starts reading and falls asleep.
It doesn't really work so well. So I went through the full traditional process because I wanted it, because of that purpose, why I wrote it. I wanted it to be as clean as possible and as well-rounded and refined as possible. So I decided to go the traditional route, and it's working out really well. So now I got a second series with them, so that's really good.
Cool. And I did see, Craig, that you've got like a bit of a character around as well. And yes, from the first, why are you trying to like humanize that? Is that to make it interesting, not just about like cybersecurity and hacking because it'd be too boring, or like why did you do that?
Sort of, I did it sort of in that first person, so you could really get into her mindset, like so see what she's saying, think what she's thinking, and feel that whole experience of what it would be like to kind of being an ethical hacker myself. My background, it sort of gave me that unique insight of how to think, and I have 5 older sisters, so it made it a little bit easier to get into a female mindset. But I had a female editor too, which helps. So, but giving you that real experience and that real insight of, you know, what it would be like to be the hacker, and as she's going through it, and it was in real time too, which is the hardest way you can write first person.
Yep.
So it's not a, you know, past tense or a pretense. It's actually getting in there and the action at the same time, and sort of seeing how she was making decisions and how she was doing things. So really try and encourage that spark of, oh, I would want to be like that. I think like that, or I feel like that is something I could do to really encourage that interest. But
okay. And what's your target audience for the books? Is it purely in the IT space, or is it what's the target audience?
So with that particular series, it's sort of, I guess you would say, high school girls, young female was the primary target. Obviously, the guys like it too, which is great. It's always good to have a bit of a wide audience, but the main sort of target was that sort of mid to late high school, early adults, to sort of encourage that, hey, maybe this is a career option for me. Maybe tech is a space, because essentially, which you probably know yourself, there's about 17% female participation in cybersecurity in Australia. So,
and IT is probably quite similar, right?
Very similar, I would say. So we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And particularly like Baidam, the company I work for, we're all about that diversity and the inclusion and trying to encourage more participation. So it just kind of makes sense. It just pulls at my, you know, social strings, the stuff I get involved with and like to do. So, but yeah, that was the general idea behind it. Yes.
And Craig, how are you getting in front of that audience? Are you going to like universities, high schools to distribute the books like that? How is your audience getting aware of, like, I guess, females in that demographic, maybe interested in cybersecurity? Where are you going to distribute that?
So sort of, I'm not sure my wife loves this, but I donate a lot of my profits basically into sort of giving copies to, like, you know, the STEM sort of initiatives and things like that with schools. And, you know, I've got, you know, donated a few copies to WA schools and Queensland schools, and just trying to get out there as much as possible. But it's kind of building its own traction now, which is quite nice. So I don't really have to do too much, but obviously I try and sort of push it out, and I try and talk to university, sort of get in some of their lectures and guest lecturing and just trying to get the information out there. But work in progress, but we're getting there.
Awesome. And the most recent book, the 5th book, that was released very recently, right?
Yes, like, the 22nd, a couple of days ago.
Yeah, a couple of days ago. Yeah, all right. And what's the premise of that book?
So sort of, it was a co-authored one with Katie Randall, a colleague from Baidam. Basically, it actually started from a random conversation we just had, I think it was about 18 months ago. It was just, someone really needs to do more in the education space in primary schools, like really start that education a little bit earlier, because we are leaving it a bit too late. Like we start the cyber awareness training and education when they're already at their first job, or when they're starting their careers,
depending
or
where they
late
start.
in high school. Yes, yeah. And it's too late. We've already got those ingrained skills, that behaviours we already have set already. So starting that nice and early, just as they're starting out using social media, and particularly they're digital natives now, right? Like they're almost born with tablets and iPhones in their hands, which is crazy. It freaks me out as a dad, but it literally is something they need to learn and get really well set in behaviours and understand. And the book was kind of that cyber awareness, cyber education, kind of a similar style to a Hacker I Am, but for primary school kids.
Okay.
Like it tells stories, makes it a bit more fun, but gives you the education and lessons as you're reading it. And it sort of tries to give them the knowledge, not say don't do it, but understand what you're doing as you're doing it, and make better decisions, which, you know, the more knowledge you have and the more you understand, you know, the better decisions hopefully they'll make. So that was the premise behind it. And we kind of went that little step further to hopefully educate the parents and the teachers at the same time. We put a back matter in it that sort of tells you what the main sort of points are. It explains what the internet is, explains, you know, gives you that whole thesaurus of these are the main terms that the kids will talk to you about. This is what you'll read through the book. This is what it makes sense. And then it has a couple of questions after each chapter to go, these are some good conversational starters to actually talk about it and encourage a bit of a more interaction between either the teachers or the kids and their parents. So,
and is it on their like personal cybersecurity side as well, in terms of like social media and like what they're trying to do on like social media and that kind of stuff, and all the weirdos, that kind of stuff, as well as the like business cybersecurity side?
So it's sort of mostly sort of aimed at, I guess, more of a little bit of both, I guess you would say. It comes down to sort of there's cyberbullying in there, and you know, who to talk to, and interaction on online gaming, and then you got the, you know, cyber stalking and, you know, harassment and things like that. It touches some pretty heavy topics for, you know, that kind of age group, but it's done in a way that is try to be a little less confronting and a little bit more educational, and try and make it as educational but light enough for them to enjoy it at that kind of age. But and it's sort of aimed at that 8-year-old to about a 12-year-old. So yeah, it's sort of when they're really starting to dig in and really starting to use all of that online, electronic, digital stuff now. So
yeah, that's awesome. That's very important, and and we've all of us got kids in this room, and I think that kind of space does need a lot of help, because kids are so digital now. Like, iPads from like the 2-3 year old, and then social media, and they want phones when they're 10, kind of thing. So it is a scary world out there, that's for sure. So awesome. Let's pivot a little bit into the more cybersecurity industry, the stuff that you do on a day-to-day basis. What are the big gaps you can see in the cybersecurity industry in Australia?
I think particularly in Australia, I think we are a little bit behind the 8 ball. We're not quite as advanced as some of the other countries around the world, particularly around getting those sort of basics in cybersecurity right. We really don't seem to do that very well. We like all the new flashy solutions, and like everybody does, it's new toys, new things to play with, but we really do bad in that lower end space of, making sure backups are done properly, making sure we isolate that from our normal stuff with ransomware, and education. Education is, for some reason, really bad. Like, we've been trying for quite a while, but we are still not really getting the message across. I think we need to do something like I don't know if you remember the slip, slop, slap kind of, sunscreen kind of. We need that for cyber to get that general education across the whole population, not just directly in the business side. Because I always say, when you're sort of doing that education side, if you can make it connect to them and be something that affects them in their personal life, and then help them be more safe in their personal life, they instantly become more safe inside their work life, because they're actually learning the right skills and doing the right things. So, but yeah, we need to do all of those basics right. Forget all the nice flashy stuff. We can do that once we get the maturity a little bit better. Yep. But yeah, there's a huge gap, and I think there's a bit of an issue with our workforce side in Australia as well. It's probably not just Australia, it's probably a worldwide thing, but we're not really training enough people. We need to, which is one of the reasons why the SOC came about, but we can go to the conversation in a minute. But we need to stop poaching each other's staff and start training a few people. Do the old school style of do traineeships. You don't hear people doing really traineeships or anything in cybersecurity. We need to do that. We need to put in the time and go, instead of paying more money and stealing them from somebody else, actually put in a bit of time. I know none of us have time because there's not enough of us, but if we don't do it, it's only going to get worse. So
yeah, I think you're definitely right. It's very common that it's like, like a network engineer or something who's like, oh, cyber's interesting. It's exactly what happened to you. Yep. They turn into, cybersecurity professional. That's generally what we see as well on that side. But you're right, it does need to have more people. And I agree, the knowledge gap is definitely significant from business owners out there, but even like internal IT managers, that kind of stuff. It's quite hard for businesses to keep up with the ever-evolving kind of cybersecurity threat. Nigel, possibly, mate, from a business owner's perspective, you had a question for Craig?
Yeah, look, Craig, it's interesting what you hear about, the lack of, I guess, the education, and, that's why we do these shows, right? Because I guess, it's hard for us as a provider to, be seen as trying to push something down someone's throat when, we genuinely are trying to protect them, make sure their biggest asset is their business is protected. If you, in your experience, what would be 3 common traits you see people don't do well? You touched on before, the backup air gaps and things like that. Like, is there 3 things that you can, really identify that is consistently done poorly that, listeners today or viewers today can go, well, look, if I fix that, I'm going to be better off?
I think probably the biggest one, which really still doesn't make any sense to me, is multifactor authentication. People still don't do that. And it doesn't make any sense. Like, yes, we all have phones now, right? And pretty much everyone has a phone. They're always carrying it in their pocket. Put MFA on everything. If you can put it on there, put it on there. Yes, some of the old legacy stuff, you still can't do that, but there is ways around that as well. So MFA is a huge problem, which we, for some reason, can't get right. It's not perfect. It's not a silver bullet, but at least it makes it a little harder, particularly for ethical hackers, to be able to get past that stuff. And the malicious guys and girls, they're starting to get past that sort of stuff now. So if they're not at least putting those basics, MFA and stuff in place, then we're wasting our time. They're just going to keep getting through. And
at least put a lock on the front door, right?
It's a start, right? And password's the lock, right? Use a password manager, use different passwords, do something to try and at least get those unique passwords. We're still even doing that wrong, and it surprises me every day, the same conversations. And it's like we said before, like, the basics just aren't getting done. And I don't know if it's that education thing where we really need to embed that education and make people understand why that affects them and why they need to make sure it's clean and the hygiene is done. And password managers are not perfect either. Like, they get breached as well, but at least they're encrypted. The data's good. You reset that password, generally you're okay. They fix it, they move on. But it is still a hell of a lot more secure than having the same password for all different accounts when there's so many breaches now. It's not funny. And the other thing is probably my sort of, I suppose my last little bugbear is the amount of information most businesses keep. A lot of it they don't need to. Actually go through a bit of a hygiene process. If you really don't need someone's date of birth, don't keep the date of birth. Make it so that, yes, pretty much it's almost guaranteed that nearly every business is going to get breached at some point. The severity is probably the only thing. So you've got to figure out how to get those basics right. Slow the sort of breaches down so they don't get too far into your systems, but reduce that impact. But if they get it, make sure it's not as valuable for them and it's not as a big an issue to the sort of client base or the customers or whoever's data that actually is stolen, that what they're getting is not that valuable. And I think, I just see it all the time. Like you see all the forms going, they're always asking for date of birth and your license details. Yes, there's got to be a better way to go. Verify the details, get rid of it. And don't keep it once that validation process is done, the verification is done. But I see that a lot. I think, minimize the data, make it nice and clean, keep the hygiene right, do things, just do the basics.
Perfect. Good advice, Craig. Thank you.
So in a business then, who should be responsible for that kind of, data lifecycle piece? Because, if you look at a traditional, whatever industry business, they're focused on staying profitable, providing a service, keeping the lights on, that kind of thing. IT managers and IT teams internally or MSPs are focused on keeping the lights on. They're probably not really the kind of people that are going to dive in and look at, actually, we don't need this driver's license from 12 years ago. Who in a business should do that?
I think it's a bit of a crossover because sometimes you'll get the reason that they're collecting it is more marketing. So they want to know about their customers, their customer base. So I think it's probably a lot of the time they've got the data. So it's a bit hard to go back and sort of sanitize. So it's just somebody's got to be given that sort of responsibility. And I don't think it's IT's responsibility either, or even cybersecurity's. It needs to be back into a business function of who's using the data. If it's their data, they own the data. Someone has to own the data inside the organization. It should be their job to go back and clean it up. But particularly in the marketing space, I think someone should sit there and it should be a directive to go, stop collecting the information you don't need. Yes, we know that you indicate there could be some potential value, but minimize what you collect. Make that sort of right conscious decision for your clients going, okay, we really don't need this. It doesn't actually give us any real value. Just the fact that we feel like one day it could be useful. So just minimize that impact. Take that sort of business choice of going, this is the right decision for both us and our clients moving forward to stop collecting that kind of stuff. Do the validations, then eradicate it.
And it's interesting just on that space. JB, if you wind back probably about 5 years, Craig, the world was talking about, data is the new oil, collect as much data, whoever's got the most is going to win, right? And so now we're talking about just being really smart, just collect what you need, keep what you need, manage it accordingly, right? So I think you talk about education, it's probably reading between the tea leaves, it's probably education and evolution. Like you have to remain on the edge, otherwise you're going to fall massively behind and be completely exposed. So do you think that's a fair comment?
I think that's probably a fair comment, and particularly when you're talking around keeping up with, particularly the amount of breaches and stuff that are happening and the continuous flow, we kind of need to adapt and we need to go, okay, it's probably going to happen. How do we make it so it's minimal impact when it does, or at least reduce it as much as possible? And particularly that on-flow within your own systems, the segregation, the making sure whatever it is they get into, it does reduce as they go through, and it's making it harder and harder because the harder you can make it, the less they're going to go. They're going to stop at some point unless you have something that is completely on their wish list and they're going to get it no matter what, and then that's just the case. But as long as you make those steps harder and harder and harder to go through, it's going to slow them down. They'll move on to the next low-hanging fruit, and you can recover and try and sort of salvage whatever situation it is. But it's really separating, only collecting what you need, only keeping what you need. And it is basic, just a basic thing, right? Like just only have what you need, only keep it down to what you need. So.
Yeah, good advice.
May not land as well with marketing teams.
No, they won't like that. Yeah. But it's true. They don't need data bursts most of the time. Yeah. You could get an age gap, like a grade of, say, 20 to 50. That'd be better than actually getting the data burst.
Yeah,
there's
that's
ways
true.
around getting similar information.
What you collect definitely should be reassessed. You mentioned before MFA. So you're seeing in what you do on a day-to-day basis, a lot of businesses were still without MFA? I
think there is, particularly around that sort of small to medium business space, they are probably not as progressed along as some of the large enterprise. Larger enterprise, they're getting the single sign-ons and they're starting to get, all embedded pretty well, but you'll still see that sort of mid to small market where they're not really doing it. And I don't know if it's because there's not enough cybersecurity providers and that are really kind of working in that space, and there's not enough education going out to them to make that a simple process. Because if they don't know, they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
And it becomes a bit of a challenge. But yes, there's quite a big gap. And even in that personal lives, if we can teach them somehow as a wider community that MFA is really good, they will push that into their small businesses and their businesses they work for. So we need to just get that education part out. And I think that'll push itself. But yes, there's still a huge gap, which kind of concerns me quite a lot.
Well, just on that, Craig, Claire O'Neill had a vision to make Australia one of the safest countries from a cyber point of view by 2030. And I know she recently opened your facility. So how do you see us achieving that? Is it going to be something that the government's going to mandate? Is insurance going to be, insisting that you do these things? Like, there's a lot of hygiene that people aren't doing properly, but until there's a compelling event, it doesn't really change, right?
Yeah, you're sort of spot on. I think it's basically a lot of conversations we've had, like with industry and a few others, and with my sort of role with AISA, we have a lot of those conversations with the member base and sort of try and figure out where everyone's at, where the sort of the mindset is. And it's kind of, we're all kind of on that same page. We don't really know where that next step is, but the general consensus, I think, around particularly with that sort of legislation, it's not really, the government doesn't feel it's a government problem to fix, it's an industry problem to fix, but I think they're going to mandate some of that to make us sort of fix it ourselves and sort of push us along that right journey. I think it's a bit of a hard line to walk because they've got to make us sort of go the right direction, but they don't want to put too many roles and rules and requirements on it because then no one will meet them and it'll just cause a bit of a cascading effect and we won't get anywhere. But I think it's somewhere going to be in the middle. They're going to be changing in sort of the legal requirements and like the critical infrastructure sort of bill and things like that. There's going to be a little bit more of that. I think what they will give us the overarching, here's what we feel you need to do, and make a few fines around it potentially. There'll be sort of some consequences if you really don't do anything. But I think it needs to be at a point where it's achievable somewhere in that sort of space, but actually makes an effort and sort of really sort of starts to protect the organisations. But the problem I think at the moment, particularly in all the different states have different rules and different requirements for compliance and for regulations. So they need to somehow make that a little bit more consistent and give that, here's the general simple process for the whole of the country of these minimum requirements. If you want to work with government agencies or something like that, that will probably get a bit more consistent approach. Instead of going, you need to do these particular requirements for New South Wales or you need to do these for Queensland and all of them slightly different requirements. It needs to be a bit more consistent. I think that'll definitely help. But yeah, I don't think the government will force to a point, but I think there will be some changes. I'm just not sure how far they'll go. I think they need to do something. And they are very, very clear specifically. I've been lucky to talk to her a couple of times now for a few minutes and she seems very passionate about that. And she sort of, as far as I can tell, she wants the industry to be the solving part of that problem, not to be told what to do, but to go, this is what we as an industry feel like we need to do and sort of come up with a solution together and them help us do it, not the other way around.
It's a very hard problem, right? Because, most small businesses have to pay for this kind of stuff to turn on, right? Yeah, they've got to pay for stuff to have like air gapped backups and that to be managed and then disaster recovery testing, and they've got to pay for their MFA to be configured. They actually got to deal with it. It's a lot of things they have to do. There is some things out there like the notifiable data breach scheme and that kind of thing, which there is some regulation around. And if you have government contracts that are sort of funded at a federal or state level, there's definitely more critical infrastructure and other things they have to do. But I think that in general businesses, very hard task to do. So I can see why.
You need managed security services to be 100% tax deduction, so everyone has to take it on board.
That's a perfect solution.
There you go, Claire. Write that one in. Do you want to go through that story of what happened? Because for those listening, Baidam Solutions, which Craig's the Chief Technology Officer for, just opened, I guess, the first Indigenous SOC in Australia a couple of weeks ago, and Claire O'Neill is the Minister of Cybersecurity in Australia, came up and helped open that. Do you want to go through that kind of story? What happened, Craig?
Yeah, I think it's pretty exciting to actually have Claire come along and open up the SOC. It's not something you see every day, so we're pretty privileged, I think, and pretty honoured to have her sort of come along and do that. But it's sort of, to us, the SOC itself was sort of, I only played a bit of a small part in the creation of the SOC. We have a really sort of, I would guess you'd say, a bit of a consortium. We sort of come together with JR from Tarian, and we got White Rook with Will that we mentioned before, and Angela. We sort of come together as a team with Baidam, and they helped us with the knowledge and the creation and getting it built correctly. And we did it in I guess you'd say, a they call it a co-design sort of process so making sure it works with the Indigenous culture and the way they transfer data and transfer knowledge between each other. And so it's a little bit different to your normal SOC, and it's sort of in that way they sort of, sit side by side instead of you would normally get your sort of the low 1, 2 and 3 sort of front to back. We sort of changed the process, so you've got the knowledge holders sitting next to the junior staff, so it's a bit more of a knowledge transfer right next to each other all the time, and sort of it's the way their culture does the sharing and the knowledge, and it was really good to see. And we sort of, I guess you would say, we're a bit of a different organisation, which some people probably know. We actually give 52% of our profit to social outcomes to sort of help encourage young Indigenous kids and aspirants to come through, and sort of with uni scholarships, SENS, vouchers. So we're a little bit different of an organisation, and the SOC itself is, yes, it's obviously a capability in cybersecurity, but to us it was about more giving us that capability, but then creating that education ground to solve some of that. Let's train our own people. So we bring in some actual qualified, incident responders and some SOC analysts, and sort of then bring in young aspirants and actually train them. And yes, some will stay, and we're quite happy for some to go along and work with other organisations and help pass on some of that knowledge. It's about training and doing that more social side. So we are a little bit different in that sort of space. But yeah, it was about 12 months in the process, and Cody Meakin is our SOC team lead. He's done a great job getting it all together and sort of getting it really working well. So yeah, it's exciting times, and we're just getting started, and there's a lot more to come, I think. So
it's such a big industry, right? Like we're so proud that, thank you for coming on the show. Like, for us, cyber is critical, and, we want every business to be protected. Like I had the luxury of being born here from my parents coming from a war-torn country, and, I love Australia and want to make sure that we're protected. But, unless things like what you guys do and what we're trying to do, like, we've got to work together, right? That's the main thing, is that, cyber is where, the old Olivetti typewriter became, the WordPerfect 5.1 on the computer, right? So this is the new frontier that we really need to protect. So, well done, guys. Like, really, awesome team. Yeah.
Thank you. And you're right, particularly around that working together, right? Baidam itself could not have done the SOC on its own. It was the consortium with White Rook and with Tarian, and sort of coming in and helping us build that capability. And, like you said, we're all got to work together. It's too much, I think, in the industry of us and them. We're all against each other, where, yes, we're competitors sometimes. It's the way it is, and you can't share everything. I get that. But sometimes you can come together a little bit and make everyone's life a little bit easier and say, look, this is what's working. This is what's really not working. Let's share some of this stuff and make it a bit easier. And, everyone gets better for it. We all get more protected, and we will become what Claire O'Neill wants us to be, and be the most secure nation. So I think, we have a lot of work to do, but yeah, we're on the right path, I think.
Yeah. Eating an elephant one step at a time. So
that's it. Yes,
work, right?
One step at a time.
So the Security Operations Centre you've started, is it starting 24/7 straight away? How many people in the team?
We sort of got I think we've got 5 staff now inside the team. So we're sort of going to progressively grow that as over time, particularly with those young aspirants coming through. We want to be bringing new people in and sort of training them, and hopefully, letting them go out and do the sort of stuff in the industry itself. And, great if some stay too, but if they go, that's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kicking along now. We're just starting to get us our first few customers on sort of board and start sort of doing the processing. And yeah, it's very exciting. It's still early days, but we're hoping it goes quite well, and which it looks like it's going to. And obviously the publicity with Claire coming along and sort of helping us get the word out there is definitely a bit of a benefit. It helps us get it out there. So
yeah, well, I'll have to get you back in a year or two and see how big the team is then. Maybe you're spread across multiple sites and big team running. It's exciting.
I think it'll be quite potential. I think because I was actually brought on with Baidam January last year to come internally after doing some contracting for him for a while. So literally my team, the tech team, didn't even exist 18 months ago. And now we have basically as many techs as we do as non-techs. So I think it's quite exciting times, and we're a lot of growth. So
that's exciting. Good. So I'm conscious of time, but Craig, before we wrap out, what's next for Craig Fort? More books coming out. Obviously, you're pretty invested in the Baidam journey, and you started the SOC, and you want to see that grow. But what's next, mate?
I think definitely helping Baidam sort of grow along a lot more. A bit of a social strings on me. It pulls at my heartstrings, makes me want to do a bit more and get out of bed. So definitely more of that. And definitely more books. I've already written the next one for my Foresight series, so the Hacker Fantasy series. That's coming out at the end of the year.
Cool.
And I'm starting to write the next one in that. And I think from the response with the primary school awareness book, it actually sold enough copies to make us best-selling authors before it was actually even released, just in the pre-orders. So
How does that work? How many copies? To be
you have to do, in Australia, you have to do 5,000 plus
Cool.
books. So it was in the pre-order time frame. I think we were
Wow.
nearly 6,000 books. So it was
exciting.
It's quite exciting. So that's a nice little title I can have, which is pretty cool. But
Yep. Should I open with that? Best-selling author.
best-selling author. Yeah.
Wow.
It's still weird saying that I'm author. Right? It still feels a bit weird saying I'm a published author. But yeah, but it's So probably more books. I think probably some more education and awareness, because I'm pretty passionate about that. I like to try and transfer any knowledge I have and have those conversations, and particularly around the entry into cyber. I try and make that as easy as possible, because I know even with a long time in sort of IT, that sort of foundation background, even I found it pretty hard to make that physical jump from an IT into an actual full-time cyber role. So I just think it's too hard, and I think we can do better. So we'll keep sharing and keep pushing that along.
Speak love to God, but thanks for coming in, Craig. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a really good chat.
Thanks, Ray.